My name is Steve Daly. I'm Senior Vice President of Solutions for the Global Digital Transformation Group at New Era Technologies. And the topic of today's conversation is just a quick briefing on kind of Microsoft Copilot, where things sit. And then kind of the big thing we want to talk about is of course, Ignite. So Ignite took place in Chicago a few weeks ago, and there's a lot of great content around Copilot. And I want to take the opportunity to share that and then open it up to the floor for any questions for anybody that's been able to attend this afternoon. So open up for any questions. I can try to answer them on the fly for you, or of course you can get back to us. My information is here. Please don't hesitate to reach out. You can also go to our website and see a lot of the same content as well, specifically around our intelligent adoption framework, which I'll introduce here in a few slides. But our intelligent adoption framework is something that we've built to help customers go through the process of adopting generative AI tools like Copilot and the Copilot suite. Obviously, Copilot is tagged on a lot of different projects in the Microsoft portfolio. And we've spent well over the past year getting ourselves skilled up in Copilot and everything it can do, and not just the Copilot tools themselves, but extending it into Azure and things like that. So, without any ado, just so we get started. So a lot of this is fairly obvious. The world is changing. Almost just now, 2 years ago to the day, November 30th, 2 years ago is when ChatGPT was released to the masses. And it created a tidal wave of change in the technology space. And we've all seen it. It's all over the media. There's been a lot of death knells of jobs and roles in companies and things like that. But I think what we're seeing is kind of a little bit of the slowing down of that. In fact, there's been some articles even just this week about kind of generative AI as a whole kind of slowing down a bit. But we're kind of at an inflection point. So, what we're seeing is the combination of technology innovation, like we're seeing with generative AI and AI as a whole, that being the superset, and really kind of looking at this kind of digital debt as a Microsoft term around. There's just not a lot of time, especially in the post-COVID world, where there's a lot of additional communication that needs to take place on a proactive basis. A lot of times, a lot of communication just kind of happened because you were in the same office together. And now there's a lot more time communicating, a lot more time, creating on your own, and then having to come back and integrate those creations with the rest of the team because of a remote workforce. And a lot of times that's really kind of created a demand on energy and focus. And so that's a lot of what Copilot and generative AI helps. So like I mentioned a few minutes ago, with ChatGPT being introduced in November of 2002, at the time it was the fastest to 100 million users. It took around 3 months. Since that time, Facebook's Threads product actually built up faster because obviously it's a very close tie-in to Instagram. But really, as far as enterprise technologies go, it's probably been one of the fastest from imagination to realization is what I kind of call it, because a lot of companies that in 20 or 30 years ago when the internet came around, people were still trying to figure out what the internet was and how it could help businesses. Generative AI, in my experience, has been people have really been trying to use it as a solution looking for a problem. Really kind of how can I do this? How can I use it? What is it going to be? And so we're seeing some of the impact in kind of the global GDP as being faster than many of the other technologies we've seen. So, as I mentioned, when you look at, the internet that took place, it took a bit of time for it to really start seeing real impact to GDP, excuse me. The cloud is probably the most recent technological innovation that's really seen as an impact to GDP. But AI is going to be even bigger than that, and we're seeing that this year, especially towards the end of the year. Earlier this year was a little bit slower, but I definitely think the end of this year and going into next year, we're seeing a lot of growth. Really, because clients of ours and organizations in general, and this comes from MIT Sloan Management Review, really kind of going into next year, organizations are seeing a little bit of the shakeout in generative AI. They're seeing some of the solutions to the foundational issues that they've identified, for example, data problems and security problems, especially in their Microsoft 365 tenant. And they're really believing that, 87% of companies are believing that, AI will give them a competitive edge. To go against that is a little bit of preparing. So what we're seeing is this imagination and realization conflict. And it's really kind of, they want to do it. There's a lot of fear of missing out. A lot of people are seeing the cool videos, especially coming out of Ignite, seeing all the great tech, the Copilot and everything that Copilot touches, what it can do, and coming back to your company and saying, we really need this, we really have to have this, but realizing that we need to look at certain things before you prepare and to implement it. And it really kind of starts with, looking at what the organization's goals are, what are our pain points that we're trying to address with AI, what is our current capabilities in terms of AI. Do we have a data strategy in place? Especially true in kind of discriminative AI or old school AI, data was very important to help build the model and do classification. Really, in generative AI, it's even more important for two reasons. One, the data that's used in generative AI solutions is going to create wholly new content, and that's the challenge with hallucinations and bias, is that data that goes into training a model or is really directs the output of that model. And on the other side, the second problem with generative AI is there's no explainability or traceability of that content. So when something comes out of a large language model, it's almost impossible to trace where that content is coming from. So you really need to make sure that your data strategy in place. And then lastly, do you have the right infrastructure? And this has been an interesting thing we've seen, as far as New Era goes, is it's, do we have, the cloud capabilities in place? Are we secure? Do we have the infrastructure in place to keep data from leaking? Intellectual property data, other processes, customer data, especially if you're in a regulated industry. Do we have the right infrastructure in place? And then we're also seeing the repatriation of a lot of cloud workloads coming back into the data center, back into the enterprise data center. And with that, the people are challenged with, well, how do we do generative AI? And that's where, we partner with Cisco and other organizations to be able to look at how can we do inference and model training within a data center using the new Cisco pod architecture. And how does that work with, Microsoft Azure and Copilot and all the rest? And that's what kind of takes us to our approach. And this goes across all of our AI initiatives, and we call it the Intelligent Adoption Framework. And it really kind of allows us to have a balanced approach where we ensure we walk through the preparation steps that I just talked about in kind of the three major areas. Strategic alignment. Do we understand the value of it? Are we doing it for the right reasons? There are a lot of instances, especially early stage, and in generative AI terms, yes, it's been around for 2 years, but as far as general purpose technology goes, we're still very much in the first couple of innings of the baseball game, so to speak, when it comes to generative AI. It's still very early. So, are we looking at the value? Are we doing it for the right reason other than just fear of missing out? And there's a lot of opportunity with that, especially with what was announced at Ignite a couple weeks ago. How do we secure it? Do we have the technical readiness? And then lastly, do we have the user enablement? This is a very interesting area of change management because of the fact that initially when the press came out about generative AI, it was going to take jobs and people were working at, as a developer myself, AI is going to do away with developers and do away with this role and that role. And so having that organizational change management focus is also very important. And that's part of our intelligent adoption framework. So with that, we kind of look at 4 different phases, envision, align, launch, and evolve. And we look at specific jobs to be done and different personas within the organization, and then kind of work backwards and we use some of our digital marketing teams capabilities around persona development and jobs to be done and user flow mapping. And then we also work with our OCM team, or organizational change management team, working on user readiness. All the while, our technology teams, our data team, our technology team, and our infrastructure teams are looking at all those different, kind of foundational elements that need to be addressed as well. So all that comes about to, Copilot for Microsoft 365, and we've all seen and heard about what Copilot for Microsoft 365 can do. Satya Nadella was part of the investment in OpenAI. He got access to OpenAI's tech, and the edict came out from him down to all his product teams that basically said we need a generative AI enable everything in our product suite, and they've done an okay job of that, especially earlier in this year. There's I think a lot of misses before hits. But with the recent Wave 2 introduction, and then that happened this fall, and then some of the things that were introduced in Ignite, there was a lot of good information. The one thing, we'll deep dive this a little bit in a few slides, but the one thing that's still kind of missing, and we have a lot of conversations with clients about this, is what is specifically the return on investment? What is the return that I can see from implementing Copilot? It's an expensive tool when you look at it against the rest of the Microsoft 365 suite. It's an additional $30 per user per month. And as of now, Microsoft has been somewhat remiss providing discounts and things like that. My 2 cents, my opinion is that Microsoft is kind of using some economics to help slow the adoption of Copilot because of the resources that Microsoft requires to be able to support Copilot and what generative AI requirements are on a per tenant basis. That's totally my opinion, but I think that's one of the reasons. So I think as we move into Microsoft's second half of their fiscal year on January 1st, we might see some additional opportunities for discounts and things like that around the Copilot suite. But I'm not going to go too much in depth on the specifics of what Copilot. This is actually a video, but because my camera's not working, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to share the sound, but I'm not going to take the time today to really kind of go into what is Copilot for Microsoft 365. I will at the Q&A phase. If you guys would like to ask me some questions, I can answer them as best as I can, but I really want to kind of get into what we saw at Ignite and what's new that's coming out, whether it's in preview, in early access preview, or some of the things we'll show today is actually live. If you'd like to talk to me about anything about Copilot for Microsoft 365 and really anything Copilot, because we also do a lot with GitHub Copilot and Copilot for Sales and Copilot for Service, as well as bespoke AI, generative AI solutions, we can do that as well. So the early findings, and I'm going to say this just with a huge caveat. I don't know if you can see it in the footnote, but this is early findings from Microsoft's own research. So this is internal Copilot users across an organization they call MCAPS. MCAPS is their sales and commercial organization. And this was one of the things they talked about at Ignite is their real world impact to their sales organizations, their IT, HR, engineering, and marketing. So a lot of people do agree that it makes them more productive. It makes them focus on more important work. It allows them to stay in the flow. It's more satisfying, and I don't have to do more mundane tasks. The challenge there is that there's no what I call real there. There's no real data that shows that. As far as if I'm saving a user time, what are they using that time for? Is it lost? Is it are they using it for an additional value proposition that they have to do in their job? Or do they just go away? So a lot of this content, to be honest, in my opinion, is still very subjective. One of the things they mentioned at Ignite is they are fully focused on providing better tools than are currently available in Viva to be able to really show exact objective data on the usage of Copilot, and if you're really seeing an impact, a real impact into your users' lives. So there's a lot of specifics here about role function and things like that. Again, in our intelligent adoption framework, we look at it in this way. We look at the persona, the jobs they have to do. We look at opportunities, very much of a kind of a Toyota method of the old Toyota manufacturing method of, is there an opportunity for us to for some optimization? Is generative AI the tool, and how can, for example, Teams, Copilot in Teams be helpful? So in general, kind of the major points on the right side of the slide, 96% say they would be disappointed if they didn't have access, that they wouldn't want to go back working without Copilot. And what's interesting is that Copilot would influence the choice of employer. So I think you're going to see that more next year, and not just Copilot specific, but I think access to generative AI tools. For example, we do a lot of work in AI coding assistants like GitHub Copilot. And I do think in that case, you're going to start seeing where when you're looking at recruiting and or retaining application development talent, you're going to have to look at an AI coding assistant, because it does provide a good quality of life for your developer, and it does help you in your metrics. I did a webinar that's available on our YouTube channel in early November that I demoed GitHub Copilot, and it actually does. That is one of the areas that we see where generative AI has real return on investment with objective data for organizations that use metrics like DORA metrics, DORA metrics, or other agile metrics. You can see a direct effect in, for example, cycle times, and code coverage, and time to fix metrics. You can definitely see that when you're using tools like GitHub Copilot. Still a little wonky when it comes to looking at office productivity applications, but it's going to take some time to mature. So really, the big thing that I have before I get into the Ignite top 5, as far as what came out of Ignite, my killer feature for Copilot is what's called intelligent recap. So on the right side of the screen, people have heard about, Copilot in Teams, and being able to, when you turn on transcription, and you can have, if you have Copilot for Microsoft 365 or you have Teams Premium, you can, what I like about it is when I get an invitation, I get the normal, I can attend or I can't attend, and there's a new option called follow. And when I click follow, when that meeting concludes, I'll actually get a recap, and I'll talk about that in a second. That's on the left side of this image. But on the right side of the image, I get on-demand capabilities within Copilot for Teams. Inside the meeting, I can ask questions. So if I join late, I can get a quick recap of the meeting, and then I do get citations. So it'll get, if somebody's uploaded a file, it'll say we're just talking about this file, and so I'll get some of those citations. And it is real time inside of Copilot as the meeting's going on. But really, the powerhouse, in my opinion, is the intelligent recap, and you can get this post meeting. So whether you have the chat active during the meeting, or if you follow the meeting when you get the invitation, you'll get an intelligent recap, and it's a fantastic tool. It provides you with, and here in the left side of the slide, you can see I get the recording. The recording is keyframed to speakers. So if you look in the lower left-hand side there, you can see it says Mona Kane and Babak and Daniela and Amanda. I can see where they've spoken in the particular part of the meeting. I can click on each of those segments, and it'll scrub the video to that point. It's a very interesting way, so I can see who said what during the meeting, and it correlates to what you're seeing on the right side. So I see the content that was shared, the notes that were taken, but what you're seeing here is the AI notes that were taken. And so this is the transcript that then has gone through a summarization feature. And so I'm seeing the meeting notes. And what you can really see at the bottom here in this particular screenshot is what's really cool is it takes the transcript, it summarizes it, but then it also pulls out next actions or follow-up tasks and who they've been assigned to. I just had this happen. I had a big meeting just yesterday, and I saw the recap, and I was talking a lot in the meeting. I couldn't tell who said what as far as what the next actions were, but really it's a cool feature because you get the ability to come back and actually see who said what and who said they were going to be accountable or responsible for any action item that came out of the meeting. So for me, that's the killer feature. Take a quick drink here. So let's talk about Ignite. And again, if anybody wants to see more of a deep dive on anything Copilot, feel free to reach out, and I can do that. But Microsoft Ignite is this is my first time going to the Microsoft Ignite conference. It was held in Chicago, 14,000 people. It was really an interesting conference. All the content is now available online, including the slides that you can download and the videos and the transcriptions. And I've got the URL for that at the end of this presentation. But what I want to kind of pull out is what I saw as kind of the top 5 things, especially for our CSP clients and other people that are looking at Microsoft, Copilot for Microsoft 365. One is Satya's big thing that he mentioned and really is true and kind of throughout the conference, and what we're seeing in their fiscal year, and especially going into what they call H2 of their fiscal years. They've now called Copilot as the UI for AI. And if you looked at kind of the strategy of Copilot for Microsoft 365 and why I think they got it out probably a little earlier than it was ready, they kind of took it out of the oven before it's quite baked, is they get a footprint on the user interface. They've got the ubiquitous now Copilot icon that you see throughout all the different office productivity tools. So now you know what that icon means. And as Copilot matures, Copilot meaning the technology, you'll see that icon throughout. When I have GitHub Copilot turned on, it's the same icon. It's the Copilot icon I click on. And so I think what their push is they're landing the real estate, right? Because Office and Microsoft 365 is the productivity suite that the majority of organizations use nowadays. So they're kind of moving to the strategy that Copilot is the UI for AI, and that kind of backs up the term Copilot going across all their different products. So one of the big things that they was the kind of the number one thing that coming out of Ignite is they're kind of changing the nomenclature, and now they're calling everything agents. And really, what an agent is every business process will have an agent. So the Copilot will be the user interface, and everybody will have a Copilot. Is the idea? Every tool, and again, it's the UI for AI. The agents is kind of the back end side of it. So if you think of Copilot being the front end code when it comes to web development, agents is the back end code. And they've just kind of created this idea of an agent, even though, to be honest, if you get in the weeds of artificial intelligence, using this term agent as a brand is a little bit conflating the idea of what an actual AI agent is, but it's Microsoft, so they get to do that. But really, the idea of an agent is AI that has some level of autonomy to it. So while Copilot is the user interface, an agent, I can actually set it up and it will go do my bidding for me. Yes, it's a little Skynet-ish when it gets down to it, but it works behalf of employees, teams, functions. There's a lot of conversations that I had with a lot of my peers about agents, working with and for companies. So going, just a few years ago, having the API first kind of approach and composable architectures and being able to integrate with different companies through their APIs. It still was very transactional, and I had to manage the different steps of a transaction. In the agent world, it's I might, for example, go off and tell an agent to go do something. It might go and find the top 5 best companies to partner with, ask each of those 5 companies for bids. It might receive those bids. It might take the 5 down to 3, and then it'll come back to me and say, here's the 3 best bids. So it's actually done some capability and some work in the in as far as autonomy. We're actually seeing this in the logistics space. There was a big logistics technology conference a few weeks ago, and one of the companies that was demonstrated it was an agent-based system for logistics that actually helped brokers find suppliers and carriers, shippers and carriers, to actually match up, negotiate rates, and move forward. And took all that transaction from a real person on the phone, basically automated the whole thing, including using multimodal voice and other opportunities within the technology. So with that, there's kind of a full spectrum of agents. I talked about a simple agent, maybe just kind of going to get some data, summarizing data. You can think of my killer feature, the intelligent recap, as being kind of that agent. And when I click the follow button on the invitation, it knows that I want to have the transcript. I want notes. I want to see who said what when, and I want to have a set of action items. So that's kind of the idea of a relatively simple agent when it gets down to it, but it's retrieving information for me. Then, as far as, I might then have it do a task for me. So that might be, for example, the carrier, the one that I mentioned, where I say, hey, I want you to go off and do something for me. This could be as simple as something in Copilot Biz Chat, where I say, hey, go summarize all my emails from the last 10 days and tell me the meetings I need to set up. You can do that currently in Copilot Biz Chat. It's kind of a mix of retrieval and task. But I'm actually giving it a task, and it goes off and does something. There was a really interesting announcement, and I'll get to it in a couple slides, about task-based agents and how Microsoft is enabling users to be able to do more with task-based agents on their own. And then lastly, autonomous agents. And these are ones that can, dynamically plan, orchestrate agents. And this is really kind of where I was saying where this is kind of what is known in the market as agentic frameworks or agentic workflows, is where you have it dynamically plan and orchestrate. So in this guise of autonomous, in this case of this slide, is what really the market sees as agents, where, again, Microsoft is using this idea of agents for anything that can be automated. So really what was interesting is then, how are they going to make this work? So, they talked about all things agents, and then they need to kind of map this to, how do I enable users to be able to do these kind of things? So the first one of those is Copilot Studio. Copilot Studio, for those of you that are Power Platform people, Copilot Studio used to be known as Power Virtual Agents. To be quite frank, the first version of Copilot Studio that came out in late winter, early spring of this year was an awful product. It was literally a rebranded Power Virtual Agents. It wasn't very capable. It was buggy. It was kind of messy. You could tell that was a product that probably was released too soon. But what was interesting, seeing it at Ignite, is it's really going to become the way of building agents in the Microsoft stack, and not just for Copilot for Microsoft 365 users. And this is what we see as well. And we actually provide a solution where we've got customers that they don't want to go down the path of Copilot for Microsoft 365 because it is so expensive. If I've got 1,000 users, that's $30,000 a month that I'm now paying. With Copilot Studio, especially with some of the licensing changes that they announced at Ignite, I can do generative AI in a very specific use case and get it built very quickly. And I've done this for clients several times over the past couple months because, like I said, the product was really poor. To go back a couple steps, the product was poor at the beginning of the year. In May of this year at Build, they announced a new version of Copilot Studio that fixed a lot of the problems, became a lot more capable, a lot tighter integration of Power Platform. So if you are already a Power Platform customer, you can use Copilot Studio now to front-end Power Platform capabilities and use the 1,200 connectors that are available to you. And again, I've got a whole webinar that I did, I think in October, that's on our YouTube channel, where I showed Copilot Studio and what it's capable of. And then they had the Wave 2 announcements earlier this fall, and then again at Ignite, where they really kind of showed what Copilot Studio now is. So really what they're doing is they've announced kind of, you have Copilot Studio that kind of sits in the middle. They now have something called Agent Builder, which is a very, very basic, a very skinny down version of Copilot Studio. And this is for end users. And again, this is all can be managed through the administrative platform as part of Microsoft 365. But Agent Builder is something that allows you to build a very simple, quick agent. You don't get a lot of customization, and it's brand new. Then you've got Copilot Studio. And this is kind of I call it a low code, pro code model. And this is, what we, again, allows you to have a user interface. You can literally use generative AI to build the first draft of your agent. Actually, you click on a button and it says, describe your agent. You tell it what you want it to do. It asks you questions like, what's the tone? What's the knowledge source you want me to use? So it literally prompts you through the process of building your first iteration of an agent. And what's nice about Copilot Studio is they've built in, the analytics. They also built in a library of agents that you can start with. So, for example, you can have an agent that connects to your Active Directory, your Entra directory, and allows you to look at, who does what, who reports to whom, et cetera. And again, I do recommend that you take a look at the webinar that we did in October. It's on our YouTube channel. It goes much more in depth. It's really a fantastic tool for those organizations that want to get into generative AI at a much lower footprint. And to be honest, I call it the blast radius. It's a much smaller blast radius when it comes to data and security as well, because I can skinny down Copilot Studio to just look at a single PDF file, for example. So I don't give Copilot Studio access to my entire Microsoft 365 tenant. I can really skinny it down to one, knowledge source that I know is secure. And then lastly, and this was one of the big announcements, was really kind of how you can now look at Copilot Studio as an on-ramp. And we'll talk about one of the tools in a few slides, but Copilot Studio working with Visual Studio and even GitHub to extend Copilot Studio even further. So, and taking Copilot Studio maybe as your proof of concept, or maybe a way to get a Teams based agent to answer HR questions or IT questions, using that as the basics to kind of get the idea of generative AI solutions for your organization. And then if you want to, look into some more retrieval augmented generation, you have some specific needs around fine tuning an LLM, or you want to use a wholly different LLM, that's where you can look at, Visual Studio and one of the tools in the Azure portfolio that I'll talk about in a second. So really, building agents for, business processes is what it comes down to. So, with Copilot Studio, you get the rapid authoring, scale and customize, human interface to the agents. Again, I can almost say that, if Copilot is the UI for AI, Copilot Studio allows you to modify that UI for AI or build your own UI for AI. And again, I didn't mention this earlier, but it is multimodal. So Copilot Studio can be used to build, voice agents. So you can have a phone. It's got 15 or more channels, is what it's called in Copilot Studio. So I can build and deploy a web-based virtual assistant for my website. I can build and deploy a tool that'll act as a bot inside of a Teams channel, or Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, or the phone, or SMS, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. So the next big announcement, this was really cool, is what they call Copilot Actions. So the challenge with, and I think this goes a lot to the return on investment, is Copilot for Microsoft 365 is a good tool, but I want it to do something of my own bidding. Like I actually want to automate something, and I wasn't able to pull a more recent demonstration that I could show you, and the product is still in preview, but it should be coming out in what Microsoft calls H2, which is the first half of the next calendar year. We should be seeing Copilot Actions. But what it basically is, it allows a user to go through the process of of defining an action using a simple interface, so a web-based interface. I can say, message people, and I can click that drop-down box and I can tell who I want you to message. And it could be one person, a group of people I pick out of the directory. It could be a group, it could be a team that's in Teams, and I can actually request and capture information. I can then give it an iterative or a recurrence. I can say, I want you to do this, every 2 weeks, or in this case, I want it by Friday, December 20th. I want you to be able to do that. So, and then, I can then say the output. So in this case, I want to message a group of people to collect a status report, and I want you to send a summary of all that status report information to me on Friday, December 30th, Friday, December 20th. And then I can have that, basically set and forget. So for example, this is the idea of automating a task. So I can, email my team or send a notification over Teams to my team and say, hey, I need your status report for this week. And then Copilot will gather all that information, and it'll summarize it and send me an email summary. So it'll do all that gathering and bring me the data. And then there's a trigger. It's not shown. I don't have the latest UI of this, again, because it's in preview. And then I can actually do a custom prompt. For those of you that are used to doing prompt engineering, where you author your own prompt, you can and actually kind of go through the process of defining what you want the LLM to do, more specific than what's capable in the UI. You have that ability within a Copilot action. Really a cool product, and very exciting because it allows users to kind of get that task capability. It's a little bit more than just using, for example, Outlook to summarize an email or things like that. It actually allows me to do something with generative AI that's very specific with my persona and my jobs to be done. GitHub Pages is the next thing I want to cover. GitHub Pages is a really interesting way of using what they call Biz Chat. It used to be called Bing Chat for a long time, and then they called it just Copilot. And again, it was very confusing because they called it Copilot. Basically, for this case, Business Chat is basically is ChatGPT in the Microsoft realm. So it's a browser-based capability where I open a browser, I go to BizChat, and I can basically do the same things that I can do with ChatGPT, but I also have access to all the content that's within my tenant, my Microsoft 365 tenant. So the one caveat that we do tell a lot of our clients is, before you turn on Copilot for Microsoft 365, is you want to make sure that you've done due diligence around security. Do you need to look at moving up to an E5 subscription and implement Purview so you can tag data correctly to ensure your security is there, your labels are there, because again, BizChat works like the rest of the Microsoft 365 tool set in the Copilot world. If it can see it, it'll find it, it'll use it. So BizChat is now their chat, what I call the ChatGPT analog. So BizChat is what you use when you go in the browser, and you want to say something like, what is Copilot BizChat, and it goes off and finds that information. And then with Copilot Pages, and this is where BizChat is really interesting, you can create, let's say you go into BizChat and you say, I want to write a proposal to sell 1,000 widgets to Ford Motor Company. And BizChat will go off and do its thing. It'll use the large language model to generate that content. And then typically what happens, you would cut and paste that into Word or put it into an email. But with Copilot Pages, you have kind of an in situ tool inside of BizChat that allows you to have a durable artifact, is what the technical term is. But basically, you can have a web-based tool. It's very similar to Loop. Those of you that are familiar with Loop, that came out, I think, a year or two ago. It's kind of that same idea, and it's going to be interesting to see how these kind of work together. But Copilot Pages allows me to have this durable kind of artifact that I can collaborate with. So it allows me to create a page, send a link out to people by using the atting their names and bringing them into the Copilot page and actually use LLM technology, use that BizChat technology inside of an artifact. We're seeing this in the market as well. ChatGPT has a tool, Perplexity, which is one of my favorite tools, has the same idea. Claude, Gemini have this idea of creating artifacts that last longer than the actual chat session I'm in. So they stay around. So I can come back to the model and it uses that pages. It's called memory and context. It uses that page and is part of the context as it works with the large language model. So you can create durable artifacts. You can collaborate, and again, you can recall it and share the content as part of the Copilot page. Copilot pages. So the last thing to talk about, because I do want to leave some time for any questions that people might have, and really the most exciting thing is, and as we look at whether you're starting with Copilot, BizChat, or Copilot for Microsoft 365 or anything else, you really you might find yourself at a point where you need to expand, where you need to look at a specific, we call them bespoke AI solutions, where you need to leverage the opportunities that are on the Azure cloud services. And the challenge with it is there was a lot there. Azure had a lot of services, and you had OpenAI service, you had Azure AI Search, you had now the Azure AI Agent Service, you had content safety, and then you had the whole idea of observability, and I needed to look at different models. Maybe I don't want to use OpenAI, maybe I want to use a different model. We actually recommend to a lot of our clients to look at different models. A lot of people think that they should use O1 because it's the best, but it's very expensive, and you need to look at, is this the best one, and having the ability to shoot them out and look at the quality of the data, and maybe another model gives you just as good of a response. Maybe it's a couple seconds slower, and it provides you the way to do that. So what Azure AI Foundry does, and this is currently in Azure, this is something that is available now. It's you can say in a way that it replaces AI Studio, even though I think Foundry is going to see a much different path than Studio did. But with Azure AI Foundry, I can go through the process of building a bespoke AI solution, and then front end it with Copilot Studio. So for example, like I said earlier, you might start with a simple virtual assistant using Copilot Studio. You might say, you know what, the foundational model that Copilot Studio is using isn't the best. I want to fine tune it for my particular industry. So with Copilot Studio using AI Foundry, you can build that solution. You can say, for example, I want to fine tune, I want to take Mistral, or I want to take Llama, and I want to fine tune it. So I want to train it a little bit more, for lack of a better term, and then I want to put it out and have my virtual assistant use it. Or there might be industry models, and there's a few of those out there in AI Foundry where you'll see an insurance model eventually, or a healthcare model, where third parties have trained foundational models or built their own foundational models to focus on a particular vertical industry. And those are going to be made available through Azure AI Foundry. And then using things like Visual Studio, GitHub, I don't have time to talk about what they've done with GitHub, but actually a lot of the models that you can play with that are accessible to you in AI Foundry, you can actually use in the GitHub models feature. If you're a GitHub user, you can just go to github.com and look at different models, and actually they have a user interface that allows you to test out all the different models that they've got in their model service. And most importantly, is the observability. And to get to the ROI, I need to look at, how are the evaluations being used? How can I monitor usage? How do I customize? And most importantly, how do I provide governance over the usage of AI? And that's something that Azure AI Foundry allows you a lot more opportunity to be able to look at what's happening within your AI solution and customize it and make it do what you want to do going forward. So quickly, because I want to leave myself about 15 minutes for any questions anybody might have. So the session videos, slides are all on this URL, ignite.microsoft.com, ENUS, which is the localization, and then sessions. That'll take you to the session catalog. It's got a great search. They actually have Copilot technology built into the site, which was really cool during the session because or during the event, because you're able to say, I just saw this session. What's another session that does this, this, and this? And it was using Copilot technology within the event site, and so it was a really great experience. But you can do the same thing. It looks like I didn't actually try it when I most recently was on the website, but the button, the little virtual assistant is still there in the lower right hand corner. But the sessions are there. You can watch and download the videos. They're also on YouTube. But what's interesting with this particular site is the related content. So if you watch one of the videos, or you download the slides, you might want to say, well, I wonder what Microsoft Learn has about this, what courses are available on Microsoft Learn, and it's actually there on the related content. And I did attend some of the Microsoft Learn events because this is all great for all of us, but you want to learn more about it. They're doing a lot around Microsoft Learn to help drive adoption and upskilling